Sound is the only sense the human brain cannot fully shut off. In complete darkness, we remain hypervigilant to the unseen world purely through frequency and vibration. But what happens when audio ceases to be a medium of communication and instead becomes a conduit for psychological contagion?
Welcome back to Dark Coping, where horror meets the mind. I'm Constance.
And I'm Merricat. Today we are opening the file on Tuason's Undertone, currently streaming on HBO Max and for rent or purchase on Amazon Prime.
Undertone is directed with an uncompromising focus on auditory dread, while also being a clinical case study in caregiver fatigue, maternal ambivalence, and how repressed trauma can be reternalized through acoustic triggers. Let's examine the evidence.
The narrative setup is intensely claustrophobic. We follow Evie, played by Nina Kiri, as a young woman isolated with her comatose and dying mother, acting as her sole caregiver. Her only tether to the outside world is co-hosting a paranormal investigation podcast with her partner Justin, where Evie serves as the grounded skeptic to his eager believer.
Justin receives 10 anonymous video recordings from a married couple, Mike and Jessa. Jessa has begun speaking backwards in her sleep. As Evie and Justin analyze the files for their listeners, the auditory anomalies systematically invade Evie's physical reality. The sound design forces the viewer into severe auditory hypervigilance, simulating the psychological breakdown that comes from chronic sleep deprivation and isolation.
Undertone is phenomenal with minimalistic tension. It uses negative acoustic space to generate profound psychological dread. For its command of audio-driven paranoia, I give it a preliminary 5 out of 5.
And this one is a 5 out of 5 for me also, but not only for the sophisticated ambient soundtrack, it's because we are divulged into a world that artfully and meaningfully showcases horrific phases of grief, anticipatory grief, and identity loss. To understand the true terror of Undertone, we must dissect the clinical pathology driving Evie's deterioration.
If you have not yet experienced Undertone, log off now. We are crossing the threshold. From this point forward, every narrative, the legend of Abyzou, and the psychological descent of the Climax will be examined in full detail.
Before we cross the threshold into this case file, an important advisory for our listeners. Our analysis of Undertone directly examines distressing psychological triggers, including the severe toll of hospice and end-of-life care, maternal trauma, and pregnancy termination, as well as explicit audio depictions of infanticide. If you're sensitive to these subjects, please exercise discretion before proceeding. Let's examine Evie's baseline psychological state. She's experiencing severe unmanaged caregiver burnout. But beneath that, she's also suffering a partially deconstructed codependency with her mother, leaving years of unresolved and ingrained shame surrounding her mother's deathbed. She's trapped in an anticipatory grief cycle, performing daily clinical maintenance of her mother's lifeless body, while her own life has completely stalled. Her podcast isn't just a hobby, it's a dissociative coping mechanism.
And notice how her skepticism functions as an emotional defense system. By rationally dismissing the supernatural, she attempts to exert control over reality where she is entirely powerless. When she discovers she is pregnant and admits she feels unfit for motherhood, that internal guilt fractures her already fragile cognitive foundation. The external haunting doesn't begin in a vacuum, it targets a psyche already on the verge of total collapse. When analyzing Evie's emotional detachment toward her comatose mother, how do you categorize her refusal to pray or engage with the religious iconography in the home?
I disagree that she's emotionally detached from her mother. In fact, I believe she's enmeshed with her mother in childhood and possibly later in her life. What looks like detachment here is really dissociation. It's a common coping mechanism for profound grief and the overwhelming pressure of caregiving. I also noticed that she doesn't actually have a refusal to pray. She does bow at the foot of her mother's bed after leaving her for a night and realizing she fell. And she's praying to her mother for forgiveness. "I'm sorry, Mama," are words spoken repeatedly throughout the film, often while she's at the hands and feet of her mother's body in prayer. She kneels by the side of her mother's bed, confesses her feelings about pregnancy and motherhood, asking, "Can you hear me, Mama?" The only difference between her mother's religion and prayer and Evie's spiritual penance is that one woman prayed to a Catholic God while the other woman prayed to the all-knowing, all-being entity in her life, the only being dictating her worth.
And how does Evie's dynamic with any other character in the film who remain entirely off screen reflect her real world isolation?
Well, Undertone intentionally deprives us of visual proof that Evie's life is anything beyond her mother's deathbed. I mean, Evie goes to the doctor at some point, goes to a party, and seemingly gets groceries in the mail for all we know, but we never see these interactions. Same thing for when the death doula or the hospice nurse is visiting to guide Evie on what to expect and when. We never see any part of her. We only hear her words and only in a muffled distance. So, what that does for us as bystanders is forces us to feel and live how a dissociative family caregiver would feel day in and day out, completely disconnected from the real world and completely alone in their world. So, sometimes this disconnect is made stronger by other people's inability to empathize or prioritize compassion for the caregiver, like her boyfriend, Darren. And other times it's simply because there's only one person who really must deal with this in this way specifically, because it is her mother. Like when Justin asks her almost every single call, "How is your mom doing?" And Evie replies with, "Same," every time. Like Justin knows this is sad and he sympathizes with her, but he can't change the circumstances. And this imagery and purposeful scene structure to me make the entrance of the demonic spirit even more intense because it's the only thing able to come into or enter her world.
Yeah. This brings us to the entity itself, the mythological figure of Abyzou. In folklore, Abyzou is an envious, infertile demon associated with miscarriages, abortion, and infanticide. But within the architecture of the film, the demon behaves like an acoustic parasite. It uses backwards, masking, and reverse nursery rhymes to implant itself into the listener's subconscious.
The recordings corrupt the sonic memory of childhood safety by taking Baba Black Sheep and other familiar rhymes and revealing sinister phonetics beneath it. Abyzou weaponizes auditory pareidolia, which is our brain's natural tendency to find recognizable patterns in random noise. Evie is driven to madness because she is forced to actively listen to her own destruction. So, Abyzou seems to have had previous hosts before Evie and uses the invasion of their lives as acoustic bait to lure in Justin and Evie. How would this technique have worked, say, in the pre-tech era?
I mean, if we view Abyzou not just as a demon, but as an acoustic contagion, modern technology simply gave her a more efficient transmission vector. Historically, her conduit would be oral tradition and communal acoustic spaces, like nursery rhymes, playground chants, and lullabies. They function as early mnemonic devices. They rely on rhythmic, repetitive phrasing that bypasses our critical filters and lodges directly into the subconscious. By attaching her parasitic frequency to a lullaby, children effectively become unwitting broadcasters. Furthermore, communal singing like church hymns or Gregorian chants are psychologically designed to induce a state of acoustic suggestibility and mild trance. The entity could hijack the reverberating stone architecture of a church to hide a corrupting frequency within sacred harmonics.
Whoa.
As we move into the Victorian era, mechanical music boxes and wind-up dolls provided the first instances of an artificial looping audio. A corrupted music box grinding out a dissonant melody in a dark nursery functions identically to Mike and Jessa's analog tapes. The demon has always weaponized the sound of our psychological safety. The podcast is just the modern evolution of the music box.
And we know those music boxes are super creepy, so they're in almost every great film.
Yeah.
I mean, when I have one and say it starts by itself, I mean, wow, count me out. So totally agree. That's a great answer. Well, what about when Evie finds a box of crayons in her mother's side drawer? So she uses those crayons throughout the second half of the tapes, listening to the tapes, and is coloring in what looks like almost a freehands fashion. What do these crayons and what she draws represent, and why is she compelled to draw it?
From a clinical standpoint, the crayons to me signal an acute state of psychological, almost like an age regression, maybe coupled with dissociative automatism. Evie's nervous system is overwhelmed by the extreme caregiver burnout and the acoustic trauma. Her conscious ego is most likely collapsing. In an effort to cope, her psyche is involuntarily retreating into a developmental stage where it last felt protected mainly by her mother, her childhood, which we get a glimpse into in the opening of the movie, seeing all of Evie's childhood photographs and memories with her mother. Finding an artifact of her youth in her dying mother's bedside table triggers this regressive defense mechanism. It's an instinctive, desperate bid for self-soothing. But as the tapes continue to corrode her sanity, the act of coloring shifts from comfort into an ideomotor response. Her conscious mind is actively repressing the horrifying implications of the audio file and her own terrifying ambivalence about her pregnancy. Because she cannot verbalize this trauma, her body translates the acoustic vibrations directly into physical motor actions. Her hand essentially functions as a seismograph, charting the frequency of the contagion. It's almost like when you're sitting in a boring classroom and you zone out and start drawing. Mm-hmm. You sometimes have no idea what you're drawing, and you're not really conscious of why you're drawing it. Symbolically, the crayons connect the two maternal poles destroying her psyche, the dying mother she is failing to save and the unborn child she fears raising. She's turning the medium of creation into an artifact of psychological decay.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what you said is so important because we're talking about the room having photos of her as a child. I never see any photos of her beyond a certain age. She's always kept really young. And then her mom's voicemail says, "You're my little girl," your mama's little girl specifically. So there's possessiveness there. And there's also an attempt to keep her in a young role. Maybe that's part of what I brought up about codependency, because she's clearly not a little girl when that voicemail is received. So,
oh yeah, but I think that's her mother just never saw her past that stage of development.
Yeah, totally. And it's clear, like what you're saying is essentially she's regressing, because even when we are raised codependent or we are raised in some somewhat toxic situations, and again, I'm all speculating here about what's happening in this past of hers, but even when we have those situations growing up, we're still, as a child, believing this is my caregiver. I mean, this is the person who I feel safest with until, I have to pick someone else. And typically they'll do that for as long as it takes, because you don't have a choice, that no matter how your parent chooses to protect you or be with you, you rely on them. And that's the only safety you know. So I just think that Evie's demonstrating clear triggering by the fact that the roles are reversed.
We now reach the point in Undertone where the tapes can no longer be seen as innocent or safe. Both Evie and Justin here come in Abyzou, forward and backward, and Evie privately experiences multiple phenomenons inside the house all throughout the taping of the podcast. Evie, the cynic, encourages Justin into continuing to listen to the rest of the tapes. A caller named Abby calls into the podcast and is heard murdering her own child on live audio. Everyone listening is helpless in horror. While Evie is terrified, she understands now where this is all heading, reminiscent of the dreams and auditory hallucinations she's been having.
Mm.
So Evie blames herself for leaving her mother alone, and in that vacuum of extreme guilt, the visual and auditory hallucinations overtake her. The totality of the crayon drawings reveal themselves. Bloody imagery takes over, and she has a vision of her mother standing in the bathroom. Are these things a physical manifestation of complete psychosis or an actual possession?
Ultimately, I mean, we see Evie go through what could be said to be all in her mind. I mean, there's certainly an apt environment for this to be the case. But yet, you can't help but notice the religious symbolism of the house itself. The upstairs lighting is always white with a soft blue hue, whether that's daylight or lamps. And the camera angle of the stairs leading up shows a glowing ascension, like toward a heavenly realm. Meanwhile, the camera is led down the stairs. It is ominously diving to a depth, like almost uncomfortably steep, where the bottom level is adorned entirely in orange yellow light and closed red curtains. So, heaven and hell, maybe?
Yeah.
Like, this is symbolic of Evie's mother upstairs being deemed angelic, while Evie, mostly downstairs, occupying this purgatory and suffering of her own damnation for a number of offenses. Not judging, but this is what she's literally judging herself for, is not practicing the religion. She's obviously got an alcohol issue or some sort of addictive issue. She's a virgin. She's averse to motherhood. She's fornicating. That's the word they use for the sin where you live with someone you're not married to. So, all these things are just notoriously mortal sins in Catholicism. I also noticed that she doesn't take down all of the religious stuff around the house. I mean, it's everywhere. She's yes, she's putting away some of it, but not all. But just know this: like, in there's cases of Catholic exorcism. That's a real thing. It happens, and in a case performed by Monsignor Stephen Rossetti, he wrote from an exorcist diary. This is a true take of exorcisms he performed. There was a woman who was said to have been possessed by Abyzou. Actual Abyzou is the name of the demon, after she had an abortion. The demon taunted her, claiming she could never be forgiven, and tried to drag her into despair. So, validity or reality or truth to any of that, or whether that was demonic possession or just psychological breakdown on that woman's part, it would not at all surprise me if Evie's mother rehearsed this type of warning to Evie from a young age, causing adult Evie to live a condemned life of guilt and shame, like forever believing that she was unforgivable to her core. So, once the podcast receives a caller that's saying, "I'd like to speak with Mary," like, this is the name that she was planning to give her child to please her mother. I believe Evie knows that at that moment, her pregnancy might already be terminated. I mean, after all, we see her take a pill where she seems to have a certain intention behind it, and she drinks alcohol heavily as well. And when the caller is asking to speak with Mary, I think it puts Evie into a realization that she's no good for doing this thing. And shortly thereafter, the podcast's last caller is heard crying that she is no good as a mother. And listening to this in horror, Evie wants to confess to the caller about herself, like whom she believes is on to her. She says, "I killed my mama." She believes she killed her mama by leaving her alone. We know this is not true, that Evie could not have caused terminal illness by deconstructing her mama's little girl role before her mama was ready, but Evie struggles with it all the same.
Yeah, and I mean, Evie didn't have to be there for the end of her mother's life. She chose to
Nope.
be there. So her thinking that she killed her even though she was there taking care of her for the end of her days. I mean, it's really, you see the internal struggle.
Well, it's partly that, but I think when she says she's going to kill her mother, I think she believes before, like, the coma. So I'm assuming that these voicemails saying you're not here and you haven't come to pray with me and I haven't seen you in a long time, like, she believes that that's why her mother gets ill in the first place. It's just, I didn't ever go to her. I didn't. show up all the time she wanted me to. I didn't sit with her and pray with her and all that stuff. And so, unfortunately, yes, she's there as a caregiver to the end, but I don't believe she feels she has a choice at that point. So, there's this thing that happens in codependent families where, especially as a daughter, an eldest daughter, you're right there, like it's your role. So even mama's little girl turns into mama's caregiver. It just happens that way. And
Yeah.
I believe she feels utter responsibility, no matter how illogical the connection is between her mom's illness and like her lack of bonding or her lack of attention.
I mean, it's really just a generational guilt trip.
Sure is. Then there's a religious factor too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
Oh,
religious
yeah.
shame. Yeah.
How does the interpretation of her role in her mother's death act as the final catalyst for Evie's psychological collapse?
So when Evie becomes her mother's caregiver, the significantly reversed role, her mother's very body and sustenance relies solely on Evie. And then Evie is pregnant, which means there's another being completely dependent on her for survival. And I believe it is when Evie wished for both her mother's life to end and her pregnancy to end that she condemned herself for being no good and paid the ultimate price. And we, as an audience, are left wondering, is it actually through demonic punishment or just the product of years of indoctrinated psychological and spiritual pressure finally rising to the surface?
Oh, yeah. Undertone is a lean, punishing piece of psychological horror. It relies on the vulnerability of human hearing to construct an unrelenting atmosphere of grief and dread. Nina Kiri carries the singular weight of this narrative with chilling authenticity. My final assessment stands at a solid 5 out of 5.
And my rating too, of 5 out of 5. We've seen a couple movies now with Backrooms and Obsession, and this one, Undertone, having awesome ambient soundtrack, so to speak. These sound effects, these amazing auditory hallucinations and perceptions. It just puts us into all these creepy worlds. So I'm loving it for all of this. And ultimately, Undertone removes the curtain on the reality of caregiving, parentification, and identity struggles, and forces us all to hear and witness every aching death rattle. We leave you with this question for the case files. When dealing with trauma, is complete skepticism an effective shield? Or does denying your pain simply give it an undertone to fester beneath the surface? Leave your thoughts in the comments.
And thank you for joining us for this analysis. Next week, we will be dissecting the new release, Insidious Out of the Further, examining the pathology of generational trauma and the psychological toll of astral displacement. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if there is a horror movie you would like to see us discuss, leave your recommendation in the comments.
Until then, don't be afraid of the dark, be afraid of the silence.
And this is Dark Coping. Keep surviving.